Sorry, I was checking my other texts. So twisties and stringer, well, stringer and twisties and frit. Yeah. Like I said, I am not a frit fan, but a lot of people ask me questions on what is it good for and how do you use it. And so I figured I'd put a little segment on the end of it. Also in the repository of handouts on Ansteorra Facebook page, it has plans on how to build a frit maker. When I thought I wanted to make frit for fun, and I got over that real quick. But I have a frit maker design in there that you can make to make your own frit. So if you find you like frit and it's something you want to play with more, you can make your own frit maker. So twisties and stringers are basically what you use to decorate the surface of your bead. You can use a full rod to do dots, and some people use full rods exclusively for doing their dots. But if you want to do stringer work, you're going to want to be able to pull a stringer. Commercial stringers you can buy are great. They all come about the standard size. But if you're going to do scroll work or fine work, you want to be able to make your own stringers that are smaller. And so it's a good talent. It's a good thing to have. If you want to make dichroic stringers, you kind of have to know how to make a stringer. But that makes your dichroic glass last a lot longer. So a lot of people have struggled with making stringers, and when they first start, it's hard because you get used to working your glass at that molten stage when you put it on the rod, and you're used to being quick and not thinking about the consistency and where it's at in the heat cycle to work the glass. But twisties kind of require, and stringer really requires you to think about the process of heating glass. And it's actually the first thing I make people do in my intro to beads class is make a stringer, because you don't have to worry about a mandrel, and you don't have to worry about stuff going sideways and trying to remember to turn this and turn that, and heat this and heat that, and put this way and this one this way. It's just heat up a piece of glass, turn on the torch for the first time, and see what glass does when it gets hot. And so it's a really good way to introduce somebody to glass for the very first time. Because even if it's a bad stringer, you can still use it. There's no such thing as wasted glass unless you just throw it away. You can recycle and reuse most of your glass waste in one way or another. So we've already done safety in the basic class. You just have to apply all the safety methods and everything else in the same process of making glass. And just be aware of your process and of your dangers. And I'm not going to go back over all that. The tools you use to make twisties and stringers are different than the tools you use to make glass beads. So you still have the pinchies. I use pliers. I don't like tweezers. I have more control with the pliers. I don't have to use my tiny little fingers to do that. So I use my pliers. I use stainless steel chopsticks that you can get on Amazon super cheap. I use larger diameter mandrels depending on how big of a twisty or stringer I want to pull. And if it's a complex stringer, like when I'm doing stringers for jellyfish tentacles or tight big pieces of stringer, I will also use cabochon mandrels to pull my stringer. We'll get into these more with the Barony, because Barony is basically just a big complex stringer. But for this class, we're going to use the chopsticks and the pliers to pull. So I can show you two different ways to pull a simple stringer. And then we'll use the mandrel and the chopsticks to do the more complex. So remember that your opaque class is going to be less stiff, more flowy than your transparent glasses. And that comes into play when you start doing twisties. We're going to make a simple stringer. I'm just going to pull a couple different lengths and a couple different widths so you can see the process. It's going to be almost exactly the same from every stringer we're going to pull for this class from this point forward. So I'm going to light my torch. Put that away. Get my flame chemistry going. And I'm going to introduce the glass rod into the flame, pointing away from my face, because I don't like glass sticking in my cheek or in my neck. I don't know about anybody else, but I always tend to end up with glass in my neck. Right under my ears, like right in this area. It's very aggravating. So I've introduced the glass in. I'm going to go ahead and focus the camera more on the torch so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to melt myself a gather. The bigger the gather, the longer your stringers are going to be. So I'm going to make about a pea-sized gather. I'm going to heat up my chopstick because, again, cold don't stick to hot. If you try to stick a cold chopstick in there, it just makes dents. It doesn't do any good. So you got to heat up your chopstick. Try to rebalance my gather since I poked at it and it fell off to the side. Then I'm going to take the gather and touch it to the chopstick. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm going to pull slowly at first. And then I'll go a little faster as the glass starts to harden. And what that does is it gives me a consistent width down the entire stringer. And then I'm going to melt it at the rod and just set that aside. And as that chopstick cools, it's going to pop right off of there. By the time I get ready with this next gather, it should be ready to go. On the next gather, I'm going to use my pliers. You can use tweezers, pliers, whatever you like to pinch with that works for you the best. And make my gather. I'll pull it out of the flame. I'm going to pinch the end. I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm going to start pulling. Again, I'm going to pull slowly at first, speeding up as it starts to stiffen to maintain a consistent thickness. And I'll just melt that off the end. Set it down. I prefer to use the chopstick because the chopstick is less likely to thermal shock the end of the stringer and fall off in my hand. So I just have a preference for the chopstick. Once you get to making stringers, you'll kind of figure out which one you have a preference for. Try it both ways, see which way works best for you. Stringers tend to cool down real quick, so this is the one I just made. It's already cool. If you want a finer, hair fine stringer, you don't need to melt up as big a gather. And you'll kind of get the hang of how big of the gather you want and how long you want your stringer to be. I heat up my gather, heat up my chopstick, touch them together, go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I'll pull faster. And faster means thinner and longer, so much longer. That is way long. It goes all the way across the studio. But that's how you determine the width of the stringer. is how fast you pull. So you have to heat it up, make it gather, touch your pull thing, either pinch it with your pliers or touch it with your heated up chopstick, count to 4 very slowly, say 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, 4, then start pulling. If you watch the glass when you're pulling, if it's too thick, speed up. If it's too thin, slow down and pull until you're out of glass or until it's too long. And then just flame cut it and set it down and let it cool. I got the super long one. I just snap them with my fingers. Some people don't do that because you get little shards of glass in your fingers sometimes. But so that gives you different consistency and thickness of stringer. It is that simple. It only gets complicated once you start making twisties. So what we're going to do is we're going to make the first twisty out of the white and red because it gives a good contrast. If you use red and black, red turns black in the flame, so it's hard to see the contrast between the two glasses. I cannot stand making red beads with black dots or black beads with red dots because I always lose my dots. So I have to let them cool, then I heat it up, and then you see the dot in the heat to get that center of that next dot. I think people give me red and black beads just to torture me. So to make a twisty, we're going to start with the most basic way that I know to make a 2-color twisty. And this is the way I learned from Mistress Ansteorra and Ansteorra. When I first started working with glass. When I first started working with glass, I was terrified of fire because I used to work in a welding shop and the backflow regulator on a settling torch that I was working on wasn't working very well and it popped and the tank blew the top and it was on fire and it scared me and it took me a really long time to get past that. Now I love playing with fire. I'm still kind of scared of it. So what you want to do is you want to heat up about 1 inch of the 2 colors that you're going to use. Get them nice and hot, but not quite to where they're melting, where they're losing their shape, and then just touch them together. And they'll stick together even though they're not flowy. And what you want to do is you want to aim your heat at right here at the end of the 2 colors, and you're going to fold it at a 90-degree bend and open it back up, and then you're going to heat the other end. Same way, where the end of those 2 colors are, heat it up. And you're going to get it nice and hot. You're going to bend it 90 degrees and then open it back up. And what that does is give you a nice solid joint. And then you want to start concentrating your heat in that middle section between where the 2 rods join. Don't pull them apart. Have just a slight positive pressure pushing them together. Not hard because you don't want to make a ball out of it, but you want to not pull them before you're ready. So you just want to heat up that central join until the glass is about the consistency of a hot taffy. And you pull it out. 1, 2, 3, 4. Wait a few seconds and then start twisting. If you want a loose twisty, twist slow. If you want a tight twisty, twist faster, pull faster, pull faster. And you twist until you're out of heat. Pick it in, cut it off with the flame, and you just sit that down off to the side. If you have a clump left like this, what you can do is you can heat it back up. And I get my trusty dusty stainless steel chopstick. And after that gets nice and melty, I touch it, and then I'll heat that all the way back. Take it out of the flame. 1, 2, 3, 4. Pull and twist. going to be a little thinner and a little shorter because there's not much of the glass left. And I'm going to cut it off the rod. I pinch that little piece off the end. And that is a basic twisty. And the consistency in your twist, getting that same size, is twisting your two hands opposite directions, the same speed, and pulling simultaneously. So you get in the habit of that. How I learned how to do that is I would take two pencils and be sitting at my desk at work, and I would practice. I'd sit there doing this. Twist, 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 turn the other way, twist, 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 until I got to where it was pretty seamlessly smooth. You know, you get to a point where it becomes muscle memory, and you kind of end up with a bunch of twisties. But yeah, you get more consistency as you practice the speed and twisting at the same time. So that is a basic 2-color twisty. I don't feel like pulling this one out, so I'm going to find my giant toolbox, my tile nippers. I'm going to nip that piece off. I didn't get it off. Maybe. So now we're going to do a more complex twisty. We're going to use, I say, 3 colors, and I'm going to use a base color that's transparent. And let's get right to it. So this twisty, we're going to make on the end of a mandrel. So I have my slightly thicker than average mandrel. Trying to see, yeah. I have my slightly thicker than mandrel, normal mandrel, and I'm going to heat that end up. And I'm going to start heating my glass at the same time because green transparent is super stiff. I'm just going to put a wrap of glass right on that very tip of that mandrel. I flatten it in. You're going to see that there's mandrels only like not even 1/4 of an inch into that glass, and you're going to start building off the end of that. And I'll stick it on the end and I'll pull out a little bit. That gives me a nice base to work with. So I can wrap my glass. Good job. Flame-proof surfaces. But it gives me a nice little cone to work off the end of. You want to keep that warm because it'll break right off the end of that mandrel if you don't. Keep it warm, but not molten, because if it gets molten, it kind of moves around on you. And if it does, just kind of roll it back out there. I'm not going to do a giant one, but the bigger you make this, the thicker and longer your stringer will be at the end of it. So if you want to make a really thick, like a rod thick piece of twisty with a lot of decoration on it, you want to build up a fairly good size gather there. Once you have your gather, you kind of want to shape it almost into a ice cream cone shape. There we go. So, and you can see the mandrel stops right there. The rest of it is just built off the end of it. And so I'm going to put the stripes on it now. I'm keeping it warm, especially where the mandrel is, but not molten. And I start here, and I'm going to push that stringer down and touch it to the base. I'm going to come over here. I'm going to work with the glob underneath and the stringer in the flame all the way to the base. I'm going to heat that back up. I don't want it to get too cold. And I'm going to come at it with another color, another stripe. This time I'm going to start from the base, and I'm going to work my way up to the top. Again, working from the base, working my way up to the top. I want to make sure all those tips are pressed down to the surface, so I kind of pop it on the end of the marber right here to make sure it's all touching. Then I'm going to heat this all up. I'm going to get my chopstick, because I just prefer chopsticks. And before it gets really molten-y, you notice I point the chopstick away from me because there's usually pieces of glass stuck to the end, and I don't want it to shoot back in my face. So I'll stick it on there while it's still hot but not molten, and use that to support that gather so it doesn't flop. And I want to heat it all up nice and hot and molten-y. Melt those stripes in so you don't end up with ridges, unless you want ridges, and then leave them up. Pull it out of the flame, let it cool. Try not to pull it apart yet. And then you're going to start pulling and twisting. And I want a relatively tight twist on this one, so I'm going to pull and twist faster. Until it stops twisting. Once it stops moving, I'm going to melt it off of here, but I'm going to leave it on the chopstick. And then I'm going to melt that off the tip of that. The reason I do it that way is so that I'm ready to go to build another complex twisty on this mandrel without having to wait for it to cool. And by the time I'm ready to pull it, it will have melted and popped off of the stainless steel chopstick. So it's still on there because it hadn't quite cooled. But if I put a drop of water on it at the joint, still hot, it'll cool faster because I'm impatient. I heard it. Don't tap the stringer, tap the chopstick. But you can see that that's a tighter twist than the red. And you have a lot more control building it up that way. I don't know how to get it to focus better. There. But you can see the difference in the twist. Twisting fast, you get that tighter twist. Twisting slower, you get a more open twist. But the key is to give it that time to cool a little bit before you start pulling and twisting. If you start pulling and twisting too fast, you don't have the same control. You're going to end up with big, little, thin, thick spots, you know. Just give it that 5 seconds to cool down a little bit, and then pull and twist. And so you can add as many colors to that twisting as you want. You can make it a 50 color twisty. This is how I make rainbow twisties. I'll do all the different colors of the rainbow on a white base or a black base, depending on what I want to accomplish. And then I pull it and you get a rainbow twisty. Using your transparent colors for a base gives you stiffer colors. That's why a lot of the cobalt blues and with the white stripes are much more controlled twists, because that cobalt's really stiff and the white is really flowy. So you're working with mostly the flowability of the blue. So you want to get that blue nice and, you know, soft, and the white will just go with it. So the darker your transparent, I think the more stiffness you have. Clear transparent is really soft because there's more minerals in clear to make it clear than there is to make a color opaque. I think what we'll do next is a ribbon cane, and then we can move on to where are we at on time? Yeah, we'll do the ribbon cane because that takes a little bit of time to build, and then we'll move into the frit and then questions and answers. So I need to get a little bit of my clear on the top shelf. Anybody got a color preference for the ribbon? Just type it out there and I'll do it. Nobody? Okay, then I'm gonna just turn around and pick. Red and yellow works for me. Okay, so we're gonna do a red and yellow ribbon cane and go on with life. So this time is a little bit different because I'm going to use a rod of glass to build the cane, even though it's going to be kind of thick because I'm lazy. I'll admit it. We're going to do my baronial colors. For this, I am also going to use my Smithies, my little big flat mashers. I have big giant flat mashers I also use. This will work because I'm only going to do a small one. So I'm going to flatten it into a paddle. Keep that paddle warm. Keep it out in the flames, keep it warm, but not hot. I don't want it to be all blendy, mindy. I want it to be fairly stiff. I try to keep it about equal, so one color is not dominant over the other. If you have a color that tends to be dominant, use a little bit less. So then I have red on one side, yellow on the other. I'm going to take black. I'm going to go around the edges. Black. I'm going to melt that all. As it melts, I'm going to start pulling it out just a little bit. Into more of an elongated paddle. And I'm going to start melting it clear. And I'm using stringer clear because it melts faster. You can use full rod, but because I'm building it on the cane, it tends to get cold fat or hot faster, and I don't want it to get to where it starts flopping around on me. And you're going to encase this paddle. Make sure you're pushing your clear down on top of your base class. You don't want to trap any air bubbles in there. Okay, so I've got it all encased. I start melting that in a little bit. And I'm starting to melt a gather of clear. I'm putting this gather of clear on both sides. I'm going to put a gather on top and a gather on bottom. Again, I'm keeping it warm. I'm not letting it get too hot so it doesn't become floppy. You don't want it to become too floppy. Usually I'm rocking out in here. My neighbors don't appreciate it. Okay, now I'm going to start melting that gather. Melt out all the creases, try to make it nice and smooth. Try to keep it straight as possible. Sometimes it'll get to a point where it is going to be floppy. If it gets that way, just heat up your marver that you use, your big marver or your cabochon mandrels work real well too. And kind of just stabilize it by adding it to the end so you can keep that gather centered. You want to get it nice and hot now, but try not to heat that rod that's attached too much because you don't want to pull it off. So pull out. This time I'm just going to keep pulling it out, and then I'm going to twist. I'm going to pull and twist. This time I'm going to melt this off the end because I have a lot left. Woohoo! No, no, no. I'll hold this for this. I'll heat this little gather that I have still left on here, and I'm going to heat it up. Count. Cool. I'm going to show you what happens if you tend to work one side over the other. Let that cool off a little bit. Okay. That is a ribbon cane. Hard to see, but it looks like a little ribbon in there. All right. So this is what happens when I pull one side and not the other with inconsistent heating and not waiting for it to cool. It gets kind of cattywampus and thin and thicker and bends in weird places. So that's my troubleshooting tool. So I think what we'll do real quick, does anybody want to see the wigwag? Do you know how to do those? Okay, so I'll go ahead and do a quick wigwag, and then I'll show you how to lay down those nice fancy canes you just made without messing them up. So I'm gonna dry this sucker off. And I'm going to light the torch. We're going to do it with white and black and red stringers and some yellow. This is what I use to make jellyfish tentacles, because you don't want it to be too standard. You want to have that variation in the twist, because it looks more organic that way. But then you make your wigwag, you cut it, and you put a color on the top. Like I would put a drop, one gather of color here on the end and kind of flatten the top a little bit and set it aside. Then you make a big blob of clear and you just push it in there as far as you can, which heats that glass on the top and pushes it down to make the bell of the jellyfish top. But you use a wigwag for that, or I do. So I'll go a little hotter this time. Then you're going to build it right off the tip. Marker it out to a barrel shape. I'm going to stick it, pull out so I have a base. Now I'm going to try working directly on top of that. Got the base done. I'm going to give it that slightly ice cream cone shape. Let it get a little firm. Start adding stripes. From the top, and I go back, touch the base. The top, go back, touch the base. On the top, go back, I touch the base. Didn't quite touch the base, so I touched the base for it. The top, going back, base. Make sure everything's sticking down. Get the next color. Let's go with red. This time I'm going to start from the base. I'm going to go up to the top. Pick it. Base to the top. Stick it. And we'll throw a little yellow in there just for fun. Heat up the gather so it doesn't get all finicky on me. I'm going to add the final colors. Because it's thin, I'm just going to go take turns going from the top to the bottom and the bottom to the top. All right, I'm going to heat it all up. Get my fancy dancy chopstick. Get in the top. Heat it all up. This time I'm going to pull it out. And I'm going to start twisting one way. And I'm going to wait. And then I'm going to pull it out and I'm going to twist the other way. And then I'm going to pull it out. I'm going to wait. And I'm going to twist the other way. And it got too cool. And I messed it up. But that's basically what it is. You're going to go out, let it cool a little bit, twist the other way. I am so rusty on these things. So I'm going to try again for a little bit. Ooh. So give it a little chance to cool. Pull it out a little bit. Twist. Pull it out a little bit. Twist the other way. Pull it out a little bit, hopefully. Twist the other way. Ah. Hopefully I got enough on there. I can show you. All right. That is still hot. Alrighty then. You can kind of see the pattern, maybe, if it'll focus. Focus. Maybe not. So if you look here, you can see the pattern where it starts changing directions. It's also how you can make a herringbone pattern. So you pull out half your stringer twisting one way, let it get to a point, and then twist the other half the other direction. If you lay them next to each other, they should match up and make a herringbone. So anybody got questions on that? All right, well, I'm going to do a quick bead and show you how to put the stringer down and a fun trick to do with stringer. And then we'll go on to frit. And we're actually running out of time. Hey, hello. So this is going to be super quick. So quick, I'll do it with clear. Okay, you've made this beautiful bead and you want to add stringer to or one of your really cool twisties that you made. But a lot of times when you lay twisties down, they stretch out and you lose your pattern. So the key to making a twisty stick without losing your pattern is to not pull it. So make your base bead, start your twisty. Oops, hope it doesn't break. And just kind of lay your twisty down. Don't pull it. If you do that, you can keep your pattern. Another way, this one. I have a very good pattern. Okay, so touch it, take your bead completely out of the flame, and just push the twisty down. When you're ready to lift it, don't pull it up. You're going to push the twisty down, keep the pattern, then you tilt it up this way and heat it up and lift. And that way you don't mess up that pattern. And that way you can keep your patterns in your twisty without losing that. And that helps you line it up and make better twisty beads. If you have a twisty on a bead and you heat it this way and then this way, that twisty will stretch across the bead and you'll get diagonal striping on the bead instead of a twisty. So just like when you're drawing with twisty or drawing with stringers and you push them down on the surface, when you're using a twisty on or a stringer on a bead, you don't want to pull that stringer. You want to push it down and just kind of roll your bead as you're putting the pressure with the twisty and laying it down. If you pull, you're going to stretch that twisty or that stringer as you're laying it down, and you're going to get thin spots and it's going to pull up from the surface of the bead, and it's not going to give you as much control. Don't work directly in the flame. You want to work right here on the side of the flame. You touch the flame, but you're not in the middle of it. You're right here on that very outside edge. And you can work on either edge depending on what side of the bead you're working on. A lot of people will dip their mandrel in the middle so they can make a bead in the middle and use both ends of the mandrel. I never really got the hang of that, but you can do that. So we're going to jump right into frit. Frit is basically just glass glitter. You want to have a surface, a spoon, a little area that you can put your frit down on. I just have a little graphite marker pad that I put right on my desktop, and I just will take my frit and I'll sprinkle it out in the pattern I want onto this graphite pad, and then I'll make a bead. Oh, not on that handle. And if you have a cup warmer, an old one that you don't use for anything, you can put your frit on that so it's warm. It's less likely to thermal shock. It will kick up faster onto the surface of your bead. Once you have your bead made, you just want to heat the surface of the bead, and then you can just roll it into the frit and it'll pick up that frit. And then you just melt it in. And you can encase it. You can rake it for swirly patterns. Once you melt it in, you can poke and twist it for swirly patterns. You can pretty much do anything, and that instead of having to apply a bunch of dots and a bunch of different colors, you just have one task to come up with the same process and get the same effect. So this side, I raked the frit, and you can see as it develops its color, it gives you a swirl on the surface of the bead. And on this side, I poked and twisted it, and you can't really see because the color was black, but it gives you more of a swirl pattern. So frit is just basically glass glitter. And you can use it on the surface of your beads to stop from having to use a bunch of different stringers or rods to get multiple colors on one bead at a time. And you can make your own color combinations. If you have small pieces of glass and you don't know what to do with it, you can do that. Some people reclaim failed beads and clean them out real good and crush those up to frit. I don't recommend that because you'll never get all the release out. But if you do get all the release out, you can certainly reclaim broken beads to make them into frit. You can pull frit into stringers, and they make really cool multicolored stringers. So frit's kind of flexible, and there's a lot of things to do with it, and it's super easy to use. Does anybody have questions? I'm gonna pop over the chat, I think. There's a couple different ways. You can take your shorts, heat them up in the kiln, dump them into a clean bowl of water, and they'll shatter. And then you just take a stainless steel.
Some success, but you know, glass, it takes practice.
Yep. But you can use the mashers and crunch them up. Some people use coffee grinders, but I don't know how long they'd last with using them to grind up glass. But there's a lot of different ways. I made one out of plumbing parts, and it was just a big pounder. Whatever you do, if you make frit, make sure you're wearing a mask when you use it because it does create silica dust and you don't want to breathe that in. Or do it underwater. That's even better. Anything else? But I like to heat it up and submerge it method better because it's clean. And it doesn't get in the air. Less likely to become airborne. All right, I'm going to flip back over to hopefully the camera. I'm getting a little better at this flipping around thing. So we'll go ahead and I'll get set up for the next class, which is going to be making Marini and applying Marini. And they're basic Marini, so it will go fairly quickly.